Tyler from Denton, Texas. I've seen many WWE fans argue that AEW only appeals to hardcore smart mark fans and not to casuals. I think this is usually a bad faith argument and used to instantly discredit not just AEW, but literally anything that isn't WWE. I've always been very skeptical that casual wrestling fans are turned off by certain types of wrestlers or styles, namely wrestlers under 6'2", a faster, more acrobatic style, i.e. flippy shit, or goofy gimmicks. We've seen WWE utilize all of those things for many years with great success. Ironically, the people who get angry and rant about such things are almost never casual fans, but hardcore WWE fans. It is funny, isn't it, how that usually works? I think these types of fans just protect their own views or project their own views onto everyone else. Do you agree? Or do you think AEW's product can never appeal to the masses, as these people argue? I do not subscribe to that argument. I do think that there is room for all types. There is room for guys who are smaller. There is room for guys who are bigger. I do think that people tend to be drawn to the larger-than-life attractions, but that doesn't mean that that's the only type of attraction that they're into. I personally know people who had fallen out of wrestling. They were not watching wrestling anymore. They didn't have any interest in it. They were fans of the Attitude Era and maybe even the Golden Era, maybe a little bit of the Ruthless Aggression. And then somewhere between then and like the mid-2010s, they fell out of it. And I know a few people who got back into it at the time that CM Punk and Daniel Bryan were on top getting over in WWE. Well, CM Punk is not a huge guy, and Daniel Bryan isn't a very big guy either. He's the opposite of that. But there is an appeal there, I think, or there can be an appeal there to the casual audience if they connect with people in a certain way, regardless of whether or not they're 6'2" or 5'8". If you have the right person in the role, Daniel Bryan was the right guy for that role at the right time. And he got over organically in spite of the company. Company never dreamed that he would get over that way. They didn't plan for it. It just happened. Why did it happen? It happened because of the fans. How many of those fans were hardcores and casuals? I don't know. I don't have the scientific breakdown of the fucking audience at that point. But I'm sure it was comprised of a little bit of both. And I know a few people who were casuals at that point, who became diehards again for a few years because of those two people. And I'm only one person. If I know a couple of people like that, I'm sure there were others. So, as you say, I mean, WWE has had success with people from all shapes and sizes and backgrounds before. AEW will find that mix at some point. Maybe it's a Darby Allin, maybe it's a Hangman Page, maybe it's somebody that isn't even working for them at this point. Maybe it's a name we've never even heard of before. They have Punk and Danielson now. Maybe it's not even them. Maybe it's somebody else. And maybe it just has to do with the fact that wrestling just, is never going to get back. People have these fantasies about, the numbers that wrestling had in the late 90s. They're never going to have that again. You can have a healthy wrestling business without having television ratings in the 6s and the 7s and, tens of millions of people. I don't think we're ever going to see those numbers again. But AEW can find plenty of success, I think, with the casual audience. They just have to hit on the right formula and the right people. Maybe they're on the roster right now, maybe they're not. And I believe AEW has already converted certain people who were not wrestling fans before into watching wrestling. I don't know that it's a huge number, but I'm sure it's not just lapsed fans who have come back because they find AEW exciting. I think they've made some new fans too. How do you measure that? How do you gauge that? It's not an easy thing. That's out of my purview. I don't know how to do that. But I do believe that they can appeal to the masses. Hank from Mount Vernon, Ohio. My question is about the talent mass in AEW. I know this is a concern of yours as well. For example, let's say Bray Wyatt comes to AEW. I have no reason to doubt your skepticism around his arrival. But for argument's sake, let's say he does come in. Do you have a reason to believe that AEW can handle the new talent mass? This was a problem I remember you talking about with WWE back when it had a huge amount of talent and to some extent you still see this with WWE. Can AEW avoid this? I feel that the fact AEW talent can book dates in other companies helps, but I would hate to see talent get lost in the shuffle. Of course it's a concern of mine. That is the risk you run when you acquire talent and don't release any. Very few people have ever been released by AEW. It's about how you maximize your minutes on TV. But you don't really hear stories about Tony Khan and AEW releasing a lot of people. And that, at some point, is going to become an issue for them. But it's all about how you maximize the time that you're given on television. And so what they have to do is just juggle all of these people on Dynamite, on Rampage, on Dark, find spots for them and just rotate talent out. Rotate them out enough where they're getting exposure on TV, not just on the YouTube shows. Is it going to become an issue? Yeah, it will. It will become an issue at some point. I think they're doing a pretty good job right now of cycling out not just the big names, but even some of the younger, inexperienced names that we don't know about. People like Daniel Garcia, 2.0. Orange Cassidy is kind of one of their guys. He just headlined Rampage the other night. Miro and Sammy on Dynamite the other week. We went through a period of a couple of months where Sammy Guevara wasn't even on TV. And then he started appearing on TV with Fuego, and they were talking about how these guys are best friends, which had never been documented on television before. Maybe in his YouTube vlogs, but never on TV. And all of a sudden, here we are now, and Sammy is the TNT champion. A little bit quicker than I would have done it, but, people disappear, they reappear, and I don't have an issue with cycling people in and out like that, but yeah, as you acquire, it's like buying a new t-shirt. If you only have limited space in your closet or in your drawer, you can buy new clothes, but if you don't get rid of some of your old clothes, guess what's going to happen? You're going to have a pile of clothes because you have no place to put it. It's the same concept. Dominic from Connecticut. With Roman Reigns currently feuding with Balor, Lesnar, and foreshadowing a Survivor Series match with Big E, do you think WWE is running the risk of overexposing him? He is undoubtedly the strongest act on either show. However, I worry that his overlapping feuds and appearances on both shows may cause his character to run out of steam and lose interest with fans. I wouldn't worry about that at all. You're worried about Roman Reigns being overexposed? Where have you been for the past 8 years? Or 6 years, or whatever it's been. People were complaining about Roman Reigns being overexposed 5 or 6 years ago. Now he's doing some of the best work of his life, and I wouldn't worry about him being on Raw. He might be on Raw a few times leading up to Survivor Series because of the whole theme of the show. Once we get past Survivor Series, Roman's a SmackDown guy. He's not going to be on Raw. He's going to be back on one show only, and he will not feel overexposed. He is the best thing on either show. You could say that has to do with how great he is or how weak maybe the shows are overall. Maybe it's a little bit of both. I think he's doing great in the role. I'm not worried about that. I'm not worried about him being overexposed. Tay from DC. I was on a thread discussing MJF and someone mentioned how he was the ultimate heel and could not possibly go babyface. I disagreed and made the case that like Edge, he could play both roles because he had the look, the charisma, the character, and the personality to pull it off. Is he the ultimate bad guy, or can MJF turn face one day? I think MJF will be a mega face one day, but that's not going to be any day soon. And I also don't think he's going to be one of these pandering babyface types, maybe more of a tweener type, but he will absolutely be cheered one day. And will have to embrace being something other than just a heel who tries to get a rise out of people. Outside of Ricky Steamboat, you don't find very many names in wrestling history who only play one role for their entire career. That's very, very rare. Everybody flips at some point, from bad to good, good to bad, some more than others, as we've seen with Big Show and Kane. I think at some point, yes, he will be. Forever is a long time. I think he will be. And I think he'll be super over. Trayvon from St. Louis, on your last episode, you talked about going to those Raws in 1998. Can you talk about what they were like to go to live, as I never got to go to a live televised show back then? How similar was it from a format point of view to present-day WWE? Well, for one, there was more pyro. I should have wore earplugs when I was at those shows. There was a lot of pyro and a lot of just explosions and noise and all kinds of stuff. Format-wise, it's really not all that different. Content-wise is another story. But you would have segments, the shows were very much formatted the same way that Russo and his team were formatting them back then. Because that really kind of ushered in that era of television for WWE. But I mean, you would have segments where someone would come to the ring and have to stand there while they went to commercial and then came back and they were airing a pre-tape from the back, all while this person is standing in the ring in a darkened building looking like an idiot. Maybe they did that less in 98, but I was at TV tapings in the early 2000s, where they did that plenty of times. But the atmosphere back then, that's the biggest difference. The atmosphere back then with the younger audience, WWE had a much younger audience back then, a lot of teenagers at those shows, and all the signs and everything. You would look at it, just a sea of signs. And people dressed up in costumes, cosplaying as different wrestlers and stuff. I mean, you get a little bit of that today, but not nearly as much as you did back then. It felt like a giant party. It really did. It felt like a giant frat party. And WWE shows today very much do not feel like a giant party. But it is still fun to go to the live shows if you've never been before. I would never tell anybody not to go at least once. The live experience is usually a lot of fun. The WrestleManias grew not to be fun for me anymore. I've been in those stadiums with 80 or 90,000 people. I was there in Dallas when they claimed 101,000. It's awe-inspiring to be part of a crowd with that many people. And some of the set pieces and the stages that WWE has put together, they're magnificent. The WrestleMania 33 stage and the set is going to be hard to top. I think that's still the best they've ever done. I think everybody should go at least once. If you have a chance to go to a live TV event, and not just WWE, AEW as well, but even WWE, if they come to town for SmackDown, if they come to town for Raw, and you've never been before and you're on the fence, everybody I think should go at least once, just to get the experience. With me, with the WrestleManias and stuff, the problem is that the shows just got too damn long. They just weren't as fun anymore. It was a chore to sit through them. As great as the set was for WrestleMania 33, that was the show that broke me. Sitting there for 7 hours as The Undertaker took off his coat and his hat and his gloves at 12:15 in the morning. That was a little much for me. Now that they're doing these 2-night WrestleManias, which is better, it makes things a lot more palatable. I think I'm over the whole thing. I mean, look, if I did it again, it would be more for the vacation with friends. I always look forward to going to WrestleMania there, especially towards the end. And 35 was the last one I went to because 36 obviously was at the PC. We weren't planning to go to 36 anyway. 35 was going to be the end of my streak. I think I've been to about 8 or 9 consecutive WrestleManias going back to 28. And I had pretty much reached my fill. But I always look forward to it because it was the one big vacation I had each year. Got time off from work, get to fly somewhere, hang out with my friends, meet all of you guys. I had a ton of meetup events. That year in Dallas, we did the live sound off the next morning with, 175 people. It was great. I loved it for all of those experiences. Would I ever go to a WrestleMania again? Yeah, I mean, I might, never say never. If they bring WrestleMania back to New Orleans or Las Vegas, I would probably be there. And they will, too. I think they will bring Mania to Vegas, probably WrestleMania 40, maybe? The 2 times I was in New Orleans were a lot of fun. You bring Mania back to either of those 2 places, I'll be there.